So for us at Department of Communities, the business case is pretty solid, not only because it's the right thing to do, to be a progressive an organisation, employer of choice, but also because we're the lead agency for the Women's Interest Portfolio in the West Australian Government, and one of our main jobs is to lead the delivery of the whole of government plan for gender equality in Western Australia, which is called Stronger Together, WA's plan for gender equality. So we've got a particular obligation to drive this conversation across the public sector and into the broader community. We know that diverse workplaces that value support women in all of their roles means that we're delivering better outcomes for the people that we serve. The other main reason why it's a really important thing for us to attend to in our workplace is because of the diversity of the clients that we have and the challenges that many of our clients experience. So we need a workforce that reflects the diversity of the people that we serve. We're very big on supporting that, trying to achieve both gender equality in our workforce, but also a very diverse workforce as well for that reason. And we know, and business case will tell us in other places, that if you get diversity in thought, diversity in experience, you're going to make better decisions and ultimately be a great place to work and to serve a very diverse community of Western Australia. So business case is pretty clear, but we've got a particular obligation because we're the lead agency for the Women's Interest Portfolio, and it's obviously something that we're driving on behalf of the state government. So I started at Communities in May of 2021, but I do want to take my hat off to my predecessors, particularly Michelle Andrews, who was the former Director General of Department of Communities. It was already a pretty awesome organisation to work, and Michelle was well on the path to driving conversations around gender equality in our organisation. But since I've arrived, I'm really pleased that we've been able to achieve a few things. The first thing is to increase the size of our Women's Interest team and to introduce a new Office of Family and Domestic Violence, or the Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence, which is a really critical part of servicing the government in terms of their agenda to support a safer community for all Western Australians. So I think it's about giving voice, giving profile, amplifying the agenda in terms of delivering on Stronger Together, which, as I mentioned, is the government's plan for gender equality in Western Australia, but really enabling the teams in our organisation to lift, to be visible, to celebrate the work that they do. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to support that since I've arrived. The other thing that we've done more proactively is recognise that there are still inherent barriers to women in our workforce, despite the fact that we're a very feminised employer. So about 75% of our employees are women, and yet I still hear that women struggle with career progression, for example, in our organisation. So most recently, we're having a joint process where we're having focus groups with female staff around their experiences in our agency. That's a joint effort between our Women's Interest team as well as our People and Culture division, to unpack the sorts of lived experience that people have with us as an employer, and to see what more we can do in that space. And I've been a Director General now for quite a number of years, and in previous agencies I've had similar conversations with particularly women in middle management roles who feel stuck at some level. And we have conversations around, well, what does it mean to return to work after parental leave, for example? What could we do while people are on parental leave to keep them connected? How do we make sure that when they step back into the workforce that we're providing flexible work arrangements that are going to work for their life experience, that they still get full access to training, to all the professional development opportunities that people deserve and are entitled to as part of their work. So there's lots of practical things that we can do, and I'm proud that we're starting that conversation in our agency. So we're already pretty awesome. We've got a very high proportion of our senior leaders are women in the organisation, but that we can always do more, and so I'm pleased that we're on that path to exploring what more our staff would like us to do to be better in that space. So for Department of Communities, as I said before, we're the whole of government agency responsible for Stronger Together, and there's three particular initiatives that we are promoting across the public sector, but we've also embraced ourselves, and I want to talk about those three. So the first one is voluntary public sector reporting to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, or WGEA as it's known. So now lots of private sector organisations are bound to report to that by the nature of the size of their workforce. Public sector at the state government level is not bound to do that, but we voluntarily have put ourselves forward. And what I've observed through that process is that what gets measured gets done, and as soon as you start to shine a light on the experience of gender equality in terms of how it shows up, particularly for pay levels, then suddenly there's interest in what that means. What are the underlying issues that sit behind it? In our case, it's actually shown that women are paid on average better than men, so that's a good outcome for our organisation, but actually not surprising given the size of the women in our workforce. So we're about 6,000 strong, 75% are women, so the numbers are probably going to work in our favour in any event. But the very act of doing that has been an excellent case study for how that might apply to other public sector agencies in Western Australia as well. So I feel like we're leading by example, as you'd expect us to be as the lead agency anyway for this space. The second one is a great piece of work that we're doing with the Department of Finance around gender equality in procurement. So this is about starting to ask some simple questions of the people that tender to the state government around what they're doing in terms of supporting gender equality in their workforce. So we've started that, and 19 agencies have joined us on that journey, including more recently some of the government trading enterprises. And of course, government procurement, the government dollar, is a very powerful lever to achieve all sorts of outcomes, not only for delivery of services and assets, but the way in which those things are procured can drive real changes into the broader economy, into the broader society. So that's an exciting thing that we're exploring. How can we use procurement to raise the profile of gender equality across multiple organisations that might not have otherwise thought about it, or might not have thought about making it more visible in their own work. So by asking a few simple questions during the procurement process, that enlivens that awareness in those organisations. And so far it's been a fantastic result, so that's another great thing that we're really proud of. The last one is something that's driven out of the Public Sector Commission. So there is an action plan across the whole of the public sector to improve public sector employment. We're right in there, as you'd expect, as the lead agency for women's interests. And I'm really proud that, I'm proud on behalf of the public sector as a whole actually, that we've been able to go from around 33% of our senior executive service being women in 2018 to now 50% of our senior executive service. So that's taken a concerted effort by our Public Sector Commissioner, Sharon O'Neill, but all Directors General and the CEOs across the sector working really hard to making sure that we're elevating women into senior leadership roles. It's been a fantastic outcome. The original target was set for 2025 and we're already there. So again, it shows, I think, once you shine a light on a certain area, once you start to look at the underlying levers of inequality in the workplace, you can start to make a difference if you really focus on those important areas. So three things that I think are making a big impact that we're really proud of. So that's a tricky question. A lot of the things that we talk about take a lot of time. So you're not going to see changes overnight necessarily. I think the piece of work that I'm really interested in is actually having a conversation with men and men in the workplace about what it might mean for them to be more, I guess, equal partners in their own relationships. Because we know that if men take more opportunity to care for children and family, then that creates opportunity for women as well. So breaking down those kind of very traditional patriarchal definitions of masculinity, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, I'd like to think that our workforce is quite a progressive workforce, that people are very open to that, but I suspect that there's still a broader societal expectation about quite traditional gendered roles, and I'd like to see that we do more work collectively around creating an expectation that it's normal for men to take time off for parental responsibilities, and I think that would be an important thing that all of us should be working towards, and our department is no different in that sense. So that's something I'm interested in exploring, and I feel like we could do much better in that space. But as I said, I'm really proud of the things that we are doing, and I think there's some significant wins there already. But if I had to name one area, it would be around trying to promote a more fulsome conversation with men in our workplace to make sure that they feel very comfortable that they can exercise the same rights as women in terms of parental leave and really encourage them to do so. If you've got children, you appreciate that it's a very fleeting opportunity. They seem to grow up so fast, and it's a fabulous opportunity for both parents to really connect with the young people in their lives. So I think that's one area that we could focus on more. I think the last year's been pretty extraordinary in Australia actually. There's been a huge shift in the narrative around the importance of women's participation in the economy more generally. We've seen the Commonwealth Government introduce new laws, making it a much more proactive duty around making sure that workplaces are safe. for women, particularly around harassment and other things like that. So there's a broader conversation around the benefit of gender equality for our economy as a whole. And while we know morally and ethically it's the right thing to do, often the bottom line speaks very strongly to organisations and to governments as well. So it's great to see that there's a change in legislation, and we're starting to see, I guess, a stronger focus on lifting participation of women in the workforce more generally. In Western Australia, of course, we've got a long way to go because our workforce is heavily driven by the resources sector, and that's of course a very male-dominated industry. But I've been really heartened by the conversations that have happened in forums such as your own around workplaces taking very seriously both the challenge but the opportunity of encouraging more women back into those quite traditional male-dominated industries. That's not the problem that we have in our agency, of course, because, as I've said a few times, we're a very heavily feminised workforce. So I think that's been a significant change. There's also been a significant conversation around workplace safety, as I mentioned, and of course we're working with other departments in Western Australia to drive a conversation around women's safety, and particularly the mining industry, on the back of various parliamentary inquiries. So all of those things, although they're difficult to measure perhaps, you get a sort of a collective sense that they're changing the narrative, that they're lifting the profile of this issue, and I think that's a very good thing. So I've been a leader in the public sector now for around a decade, so I've been a Director General since about 2014. And what I've learned is that I need, as a leader, to be open to what the workforce is telling me is important. And I remember in a previous role, I was approached by three middle management, women in middle management, who were saying, you've got a problem in our organisation. There are not enough women in senior leadership roles. And it took that conversation to open my eyes at that time, 10 years ago, to being aware of the structural limitations that exist in the public sector. And we know the public sector is a typically very welcoming environment for women generally. So that started a conversation at that time around, well, what are the barriers to women in leadership roles? And it became pretty apparent to me that there were quite basic things that we could do differently around supporting women as they return to the workforce, ensuring that they achieve professional development outcomes, curating their work experience to accommodate their needs in terms of flexible work arrangements. And I guess had those women not been brave enough to have that conversation, I don't know when it would have taken me. I don't know what else would have kind of inspired me to get on that journey. So stepping into this role, we're in Department of Communities now for 2.5 years or thereabouts, where we've got a much bigger remit on behalf of the state government. I've kind of brought that lens with me, and being curious about what more can we do is something that is the attitude I now bring to this conversation. And also being curious at the system level around what would it take to change whole systems. So the examples I've spoken to before about driving changes in procurement, or thinking differently about the way that we account for inequity in pay, all of those things are really helpful tools to shine the light on the issue and amplify it. And as I've already sort of suggested, I think that our society is moving quite quickly in this conversation, and it feels good to be not only part of that conversation, but feeling like we can add value to how this kind of agenda might be working otherwise. So that's been an important learning for me, that we listen to our workforce and we be guided by practical suggestions that people have. The other learning I'd say is that what gets measured gets done, and shining a light on this situation, revealing it, looking at benchmarks, looking at comparators, is a really powerful means of unpacking what's going on in different agencies, why parts of the economy are different in terms of their employment arrangements, all of those sorts of things. I think we've come a long way in flexible working arrangements recently, and some would say that's a lot to do with the pandemic and how we were able to respond collectively to supporting people to work in quite unusual, diverse circumstances. So I think really leading into flexible working arrangements in a very big way is paying off for all sorts of reasons. It comes with its share of challenges, but I think it's also a pretty awesome opportunity for people to achieve a better work-life balance, and for employers to be able to demonstrate the value of their employees by making it easier for them to come to work. So those sort of things have been a really important learning for me. And lastly, I think just a focus on diversity of all kinds has been a really important learning for me. At Communities, we're very proud of our focus on people with diverse sexualities and encouraging everybody to come to work and be their full selves. And we're a strong supporter, not only because we think that makes Communities a great place to work, but it also reflects the diversity of people that we serve in the broader community. So lots of learnings over the last decade, and no doubt lots more to come.